So the way, like in terms of opening your mind towards the possibilities that you haven't thought of, I think it could be effective for that type of task, either immediately or quite soon.
All right. Well, today is a special podcast day. I've been waiting for a long time, and we don't have Sharon on the call today, but we do have another special person. And his name is Andrei Vazhnov. And Andrei has been leading our Real AI efforts since the beginning, since the inception. And he's our VP of Product Architecture, and I thought it would be it's a good time to bring him in and kind of talk a little bit more about what makes AI special and, just get his general views on AI and like where everything is going and how does Real play into the super app vision of Real and the super app vision for everybody else. And maybe our listeners can get a few nuggets out of this. So Andrei, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So Andrei, we kind of planned this podcast on the go, and like the timing is kind of amazing because OpenAI just announced the GPT-4o model, right? And for our listeners who don't know what that is, models are basically simplified way of explaining a model is like, imagine someone takes a photocopy of your brain and like transports it and puts it in another human being. And if that was possible, all of a sudden the human being wakes up and it has all your memories and your thought process and your deduction powers transported into a completely different body. So did I do a good job as like what a model is for like a layman?
Yeah, I think that goes in the right direction in the sense that a model is kind of a snapshot of everything that it has learned during its training, right? So these models are trained for a really long time. It costs millions of dollars. And the training, kind of the classic example is that you want the model to recognize whether cats or dog. You show it 10,000 pictures of cats. You show it 10,000 pictures of dogs. And each time that it recognizes wrong, you slightly adjust the model. And each time you recognizes right, you leave it the same way, right? And slowly, it learns. And all that learning, which is basically the numbers that represent that model, you can then save it in a file, just like you save any other file. You can even put it on a pen drive. You can move it to another place. And when you run it, it will work exactly the same way. So I think it's a right analogy that if medicine could do that, which it cannot yet, if it could transplant brains and copy them, which it cannot do either, but if it could, then it would be a valid model.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said it's very expensive to make a model, right? Like, how expensive? Like, I read like an analogy somewhere, like training a model is cheaper than flying a jet to London and back. Is that accurate?
Well, I think one very important thing is it depends on the model size, right? I mean, you and I could train a model for, $5,000. And by the way, like when we're talking about the cost, what is the cost? The cost is, what tech people call compute, right? Basically, how long will you run it on how many CPUs and how powerful those CPUs are, right? So it's basically, you can think of it as the total of all the calculations that it can execute, which is like trillions and trillions in this case. So you and I could run it on our laptop, and that model, and it's easy to do, and it will be, for example, we could certainly run something on a laptop for, less than $1 at these prices to train it to recognize cats from dogs. But that will be a very limited model. So if you want to take a model like the GPT-4 or similar class like Llama 3, those models cost over $10 million to train, right? So,
yeah. And again, for the listeners, like GPT-4 is a model that OpenAI, which is the company that publishes, and Llama 3 is a model that Facebook, Meta, publishes, right? So there are different companies that are competing and like they're publishing different models that excel at some things and are not good at some things. So dialing back the conversation to GPT-4o, right, which is the new news in the industry, the 5 things that kind of came up that I took away were, it has a code debugging ability. You could take pictures of the code and like plug it in and it kind of helps you debug the code, right? It has understanding of like human emotion, right? The tonality and like stuff like that. It has understanding of graphical information. You can upload like a chart and like it will tell you what it is. It has like translating languages in near real time translating languages, which is pretty incredible. And it has voice synthesis, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about like these 5 points and elaborate on it a little bit.
Definitely, I think one of the probably kind of immediate practical things, right? So they showed the kind of sophisticated recognition of visual information. So this is a lot of people who've used GPT-4 or similar things do not know that if you just get a basic paid account, which doesn't cost a lot, like $20 a month, it could be actually quite useful. For example, you're filling out the website and like you don't understand what the form is saying. Just literally doing a doing a screen capture with like Shift F4 on a Mac or whatever equivalent on Windows, and just pasting it in ChatGPT and doing nothing else. And you can ask questions about what you're seeing, maybe some confusing legal form or something like this. It's very important to remember that it's not always correct, just like it's whenever you ask it any question, but it could be quite useful. It could give you a hint that you didn't expect. And the fact that it can just look at the website the same way you're visually seeing it, even an image, even a graph, and talk to you about it meaningfully. So I think that's something that most people could probably use, at least occasionally. So then the other thing that kind of from this demo is real-time translations, right? Voice translations, right? So translations, of course, are not new, right? So translations were revolutionized by neural networks maybe around 2016 in written form. And since then, they've been quite good. So even whether on Google Translate or more complicated one like DeepL. But voice-to-voice translation, the way you literally see in Star Trek, or if you read Hitchhiker's Guide, they had this Babel fish that automatically translate your voice, so it comes out sounding like your voice on the other side, speaking in another language, or indeed as any voice, you could select how you want to sound. So that's relatively new, and the fact that like a big company like OpenAI incorporated it out of the box is a kind of a useful innovation that, if that's something that you have to deal with on a daily basis, I'm sure it will be useful to you.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? That sounds specifically the voice, like the translation aspect of it. It's cool, but like you said, it's existed forever. I mean, 2016 is forever for now. However, it feels like it's still not perfect, right? Like, if I'm talking to you in Spanish and I say something in English and then I have to wait for the machine to translate it to Spanish, and then you say something in Spanish and then I have to wait for the machine to translate it back to English to me, and you hear the English part, it's still like far away from a situation where I speak English but you hear Spanish. You don't hear the English part, right? That would be like the true Star Trek or, the Hitchhiker's Galaxy part, right? Like that's the true. Do you think it would be like neural link that would do that?
Well, exactly. I was thinking the same way. If you actually wanted to have that kind of magical experience where you're physically in the same room and the other person is just not even hearing your voice, even superimposed, even overlaid on the translation, then yeah, I mean, there's two ways. Either you have like extremely sophisticated headphones, which just block out all ambient noise, and you just can hear the other person's voice in Spanish or the translated language, or something like Neuralink, even more advanced, where it's projected directly into your brain. But I think probably the most immediate application of that would be that this type of technologies will get built in probably pretty shortly. I'd say no more than a year. They'll get built in Zoom. They'll get built in Google Meet. And when you're speaking to somebody through Google Meet, you will actually be able to have a better experience if you're speaking in another language, because you won't hear the other person's voice physically overlaid on the translation. So that's how it's going to happen in the short term. And then the other point you made, which is also, I think, very important to keep in mind, just like, a ChatGPT or Llama 3 or any model can give you the wrong answer, right? And they even give you disclaimers when you start using it that could give you wrong answers. It can also, of course, give you wrong translations, especially of things that are kind of very colloquial or very situational dependent on the context of what you're talking about. So that, of course, I don't think it's going to be immediate, but probably not too long. Maybe I would say 3 years maximum, where it will become good even.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's really interesting, right? So it's in a funny way, you have an advantage in your translation situation. You have an advantage to work remote than in person, which is kind of very tricky, because now we're enabling remote is better. In many ways, this might be one of those few situations where like remote is actually better than in person.
Yeah, I haven't thought of it until we spoke now, but yes, it's absolutely true. Like if you have a highly international team and where people must speak multiple languages simultaneously, where some people don't know all the other languages present in the room, this is genuinely new, right? You can have 8 people on the same Zoom call, each speaking a different language and understanding each other, right?
Exactly. Yeah, very interesting. The other interesting piece that I thought was that could be like immediately applicable is like a custom customer support situation, right? Where you call in and like a human is talking to you. It's not like a human, it's AI actually talking to you, but like sounds like a human being in your native language and is aware of like all your context, right? Like knows about all your transactions, knows about all your current situations and everything else, and knows all the conversations you've had. How realistic is it for like technology where you can just call in and it's like literally just AI talking to you now going forward?
Well, I think it's quite realistic already. I mean, one of the things that they were demoing is this realistic emotional recognition visually and realistic, also as well as realistic recognition of emotion in the voice, as well as realistic voice synthesis, right? So one of the things that has always been kind of limiting about the AI replying to you in voice, it was kind of robotic, right? It would be like somebody like reading with like a flat tone, a press release that was written for them by someone else. And the reason that it felt that way is that the AI was not responding to the tonality in your voice, was not responding to the emotions on your face. And now they're definitely at the point where you can at least do kind of a very successful demo of it. Again, I want to caution the listeners that like the demos that they're showing, they're definitely somewhat cherry-picked, but doesn't mean that they're fake, right? That they're real, but maybe kind of the best version of what the real is. And probably a good way to think about it that you will be able to use it that fluently and that practically maybe 6 months down the road, something like that. So, and given that it is a significant step forward, that the technical support can actually speak to you like a human because it recognizes that you're frustrated in real time and can respond that way, can escalate automatically, perhaps to a human or perhaps to a supervisor. So that is definitely kind of a significant change.
Yeah, no, that's interesting too. It's like, so, in terms of like AI and how fast it's progressing, like, I don't know, it feels like a little bit over a year now since like the first GPT model came out and kind of like rocketed maybe January, February last year. We're a year and a half into this thing. Where is all of this going? Like, do you think AI will play a significant role in real estate going forward, like, or any other industry? Like, but specifically in real estate, given that our audience is agents and real estate savvy people, we're just very curious, what kind of operations you feel like will have immediate value?
Well, I mean, I think AI from the very beginning has been very good with texts, right? Like looking for patterns in texts, all type of stuff. But it's getting increasingly more sophisticated about it, right? Real estate obviously has to do a lot. It's not the only thing that's part of it, but it's a big part of it. Is reading text, reading complicated legal documents, noticing issues with it, right, and reviewing them in different ways. So it's a compliance-heavy business, right? So ensuring that complex legal documents meet the compliance burden that's relevant for them. So that's definitely, it seems like AI in different ways will be impacting that. Then, let's say all of the visual recognition, right? That's kind of fairly new. As you said, like with ChatGPT, the first public release was a year ago around that time. But the visual stuff is even more recent in terms of it's being publicly available at low cost and without complex configuration. So that's fairly new as well. So, for example, you could imagine that it could describe the way the house looks, right? So today, somebody would need to walk around and compile a description, and you can have something that's trained to create amazing description and to do a pretty good job of it. I think what unites those things is that the AI fundamentally would be good at specific tasks that could be definable ahead of time, right? Whether, you're successful or not. So, for example, you could define whether that's a successful, accurate description of a house. You could define whether the AI system found an error in the legal document. So those things, specific or perhaps specific categories of error. So those things would be probably kind of automated fairly soon. If you think more generally, like real estate business is so relationship dependent, right? And there's such a complex journey for the person to buy your home. It's literally probably one of 2 or 3 post-support decisions they do in their life. So there's a lot of kind of a complex emotional component to the journey, and that I don't think AI will ever replace, or definitely not for an extremely long time. So I don't think that will be automated in any significant way. But specific tasks like answering technical questions about where the transaction status is at a given time, or compiling a description of a home, those things could.
Interesting. So you can see how. Do you think AI can get to a point where it can suggest remodels? Like I upload a bunch of pictures of a home and say, hey, remodel this home for me. And it will generate new pictures, with complete remodeling.
No, absolutely. So my bet is probably right now, it's not anywhere as good as a real interior designer, but that's definitely a type of thing that could be, I would say, if I were to guess in the short term, within a year, it could be good for giving people ideas about what to do, right? It's probably not going to be good enough to where you could take those designs and just start implementing them, but it'll probably will be very good to open your mind and say, I haven't thought about that possibility. I could do that with my house. And then take those kind of top ideas and take them to an interior designer, to an architect, and then basically narrow it down from there. So the way, in terms of opening your mind towards the possibilities that you haven't thought of, I think it could be effective for that type of task, either immediately or quite soon. But I would say I would compare it, could compare it to logos and, let's say, graphic design. So, it's every time these new models come out, people say, this is just going to replace graphic design or logo design. I said that has not happened, right? So the kind of designs it generates, yes, they're interesting, but they're definitely not anywhere close to finished to the way a company would really use. However, it is useful for you personally as the principal of that particular project, who needs to create a new logo for the company or their brokerage or whatever, to say, okay, I haven't thought about that idea. Let me give that to my designer and have them riff on that, right? So I think it will be useful immediately in that sense, but not in a kind of finished product sense. I don't see that, at least not within less than a year.
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? None of the things that ChatGPT or 4.0 launched is still a year and a half into it, where everybody keeps saying humans are being replaced. It feels like it's still not going to replace anything. It's still augmentative. It's still augmentative behavior, augmentative help, but not a replacement help, right? I've kind of thought about this, and I feel like at some point humans will be replaced with AI, but in more, tasks that have a standard SOP, like a standard way of operating, a standard way of procedural operating. But anything that requires significant reasoning and negotiation, I think the human aspect of humanity in general, consciousness or whatever you want to talk about, is probably the hardest piece for it to crack. And until that's cracked, you can't really go and say, okay, I'm going to negotiate in your behalf. It's going to be too rational, and negotiations are not rational, right? Negotiating real estate prices, negotiating real estate commissions, giving up on a few things, compromising on a few things. These are irrational things that humans do and then find a way to rationalize it, right? So I think that might be a little too far-fetched at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe a good example historically, which is fairly recent, is that if you think back to maybe 2016, 2017, 2018, you've heard all the time that self-driving cars are just around the corner. They're just around the corner, maybe another 6 months and maybe a year. And today, it's pretty clear that everybody pretty much said, well, it was much harder than we anticipated. But it was literally 5 years that you would read in the press, day in and day out, how it was just around the corner. And it would have all this impacts on employment and all this kind of stuff. And it hasn't happened. Now, it's interesting to understand why it hasn't happened. Precisely because of that 1% of situations where you have to apply true human reasoning and deal with true novelty. So the self-driving cars, they're actually better than humans driving 99% of the time, right? Like when you're on the highway and like everything's moving in an organized way, it's probably driving more accurately. But it's not, for example, a classic case where I don't remember like which company, but they had this problem where they trained their self-driving car to obey all the rules. But in that particular city, the official rule was that if the light is yellow of the street light, you are not allowed to begin a maneuver, right? You only allowed to finish a maneuver, right? So if you're already in the intersection, you could finish, but you could not enter. But what all drivers did is that they would just enter anyway on the yellow line. So as a result, the self-driving car literally was stuck because it was always waiting for that condition to be fulfilled, and it was never be fulfilled. People would always go on the yellow light. So as a result, it was frustrating everybody, generating like situation kind of unwelcome situations that were dangerous for other people. And it's in the same way, like you may train it on every situation, but not in a situation that I don't know, like a biker appears out of the some bush because they were on the country road and things like that a human will react to, but the AI has not had that in their training sets, right? That particular situation. So anything that requires dealing with true novelty, which is what the human beings are very good at, for that, and it's a good news for all of us, right? Like for that, there is no even plausible technology today who could do that. And so all of the AI is for task-specific things where the performance could be adjudicated ahead of time. Say, okay, well, in this 10,000 road conditions, do this, but there's always one more, right? So
yeah, I mean, like I think we can conclude by saying that exceptions are the things that break systems, not the norm, and exceptions are the reason why systems are hard to replace with machines rather than humans.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's a good one-sentence way of summarizing.
Well, Andrei, thanks for spending some time with us, and hopefully, we can have you back.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you for having me. See you.